I got two things for you.
I play Pokemon.
We got all of us that were at the table decided. It is really
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. That's a good movie. I like it too. I felt I liked it on that. I was trying. Yeah, good job. It's good. I enjoy it. I think it's also pretty bad. I feel
So you don't like that.
I know. At the end.
Well, I'm kidding, guys.
All right, here we go. Where do we finish it here? Oh, DBQ. So I have a good hunk of them graded, and I don't have them all. They take a long time. And I don't know how many I'll be able to grade today. So I kind of got some other conflicts, but I'll try to get as many graded as I can. And I've had really good ones and really bad ones. And but as I told you, if you did, you had to have irreconcilable, reservationists, loyal Democrats, had to have something about the vote. It was all about the Senate, had to have context. You did that, you're a good shit. You didn't have the irreconcilables and the reservationists. You didn't explain them, but I told you. And let me hand this back. It's out of 15. Basically, as long as you answered them, I just went through and made sure. I just want to give you a little credit for the walk through the 20th century with Bill Moyers. And as soon as I get the DBQ, I'm going to type in. I got about 3 grades to put in. I'm going to put them in as soon as I get that done. And then somebody didn't bother to turn theirs in. So, finishing here for notes. Oh, we got that. So, that is going to trigger a series of, everyone write down, nationwide strikes. All over the United States, strikes. We didn't get this? This we did not have, right? So strike, because prices were so high. And think about it this way, during the war, it kind of tamped down on strikes, because they could say it was your patriotic duty not to strike. You're to keep going with the war effort. The biggest areas were in Seattle, longshoremen who unload ships, and Boston. There was a police strike. I should add the governor of Massachusetts, a guy named Calvin Coolidge, would become famous by helping to brutally put down strikes, become a hero of conservative Republicans or anti-labor unions. But the biggest would be in West Virginia, called the Coalfield Wars, a bloody fight that eventually the government would send in troops. The best personified by what's called the Maywan Massacre of workers killed by private guards. And unions would be brutally put down. Brutally put down. Labor union membership would go down dramatically throughout the entire decade. So I did not write that down, but union membership would go down. These are coal miners. This is this is 1914. So it's right before these strikes. And the thing was, this is just the beginning of electrification of the United States, at least in big cities, not in rural areas. And to turn the dynamo, they needed coal power to heat water, to blow the steam by to turn the dynamo. There's also a wave of anarchist attacks. This is the last big wave of anarchist attacks. So you can see something similar to this is going to happen in a little bit in the late 60s, early 70s. The most terrorist attacks in American history are actually going to be in the 1970s by far. But there's going to be over 50 attacks. A number of them were mail bombs. That house on the right there was the home of Attorney General Palmer. Someone sent him a bomb, and he would be wounded by this, which, as you can imagine, would affect him dramatically. Fear of an attack like this would help lead to Palmer, who was already rabidly anti-communist and geared up by war to become even more almost tyrannical about his effort to try to find radicals. The last big anarchist attack of this era would be the bloodiest in 1920. Wall Street, there's the remnants of that. They hit a bomb in a cart, basically a food cart, and would kill 38 people. And this was the end. Anarchism as a worldwide movement, let alone the United States, was dying by then. So I told you about anarchist attacks all over the world before World War I. Pretty much gone. And the reason why was the Bolshevik Revolution. Since the Bolsheviks won, that kind of left-wing, more pro-socialist movement started gearing towards this international communist revolution they thought might happen. Still be anarchism like Spain, but that's another story. But you combine nationwide strikes with anarchist attacks going up, and remember the attitude of total war. The war just ended. It's not like all of a sudden you can switch off. This fear of outsiders, fear of internal rebellion will lead to these strikes and bombings will lead to this fear of revolution. Is this workers demanding rights, or is this the revolution beginning? And remember, the Bolshevik Revolution happened. Here is Bolshevism turning back the clock. And here is a pro-corporate cartoon of Uncle Sam beating up union workers for demanding wage increases to match inflation. How dare they feed their children? But total war ideals did not go away. And Palmer, who had that attack at his home, he's like, oh my God, they're out to kill me? This is proof. And remember, they were rabidly anti-socialist. We already had that fear of bomb-throwing anarchists, but now they're the Bolsheviks. And what color did the Bolsheviks fight under in their Civil War? Thus, the Red Scare. And Attorney General Palmer will begin a series of extra-legal, meaning outside of the normal constitutional bounds, especially doing these within states, because they would go under state law. I mean, it was really questionable constitutionality. Wonder what that's like. Can't wrap my mind around that today. But that's once again me being facetious. I should add this. There weren't that many anarchists or socialists. There were a number arrested. Debs is still in prison. What it turned into was just anti-union. They would say anybody's in the labor union, they went after. And the IWW would be destroyed. Here's a scene from that cartoon of Bolshevism, IWW. Attacking labor unions. The head of it, Big Bill Hayward, is going to be exiled. They're going to ship him to Russia. Emmett Goldman, the most famous socialist, will be shipped to Russia, exiled, under a little-known law. Do you remember way back in 1798? Do you remember 1798, those heady days when the United States went into what's called the quasi-war, which you will have to know. Yeah, you will. But 1798, now we got some work to do. You remember the Alien and Sedition? You remember those laws? There were 3 laws that kind of lumped together as those Alien and Sedition. No criticism of the government, but one was that dangerous aliens could be deported. They called it the Enemy Aliens Act. And they dusted off the Enemy Aliens Act, even though the war was over, and deported a bunch of leaders of the IWW because they didn't want labor unions, Senator Russian, and some also more kind of socialist writers. Everyone got that, the Enemy Aliens Act? Why am I mentioning that today? It goes back to the Alien and Sedition Act in 1798. And they'll be used to break up unions after World War I. Anybody know why? It would also be used in World War II. To put Japanese Americans in concentration camps. It's been used 3 times. It wasn't used in 1798. It was used during the War of 1812. Yeah. 1798, or be used a little bit in the War of 1812, be used here, but they say World War I, but actually it was after World War I. And then World War II. Anybody know why I'm telling you this? What's going on right now? Yeah, President Trump is involved and is now deporting what he sees as dangerous elements at this moment. And weirdly shipping him to hellhole prisons in El Salvador. And this is happening right now. So it happened then. Prison in El Salvador. It's kind of crazy what's going on. This is, and the 2 judges have said this is unconstitutional. The Trump administration is ignoring them. So that's where we have a little constitutional, we have a full-time crisis right now. This is a big deal, is my term. And it's interesting. History gives us context, background. You know, like if you're going to write about the ratification of the Treaty of Versailles, you would write about what's in the treaty for context. So, at the same time, there's what's called the Great Migration. The Great Migration was the movement of African Americans from the hell of the South. Thank you, everyone. To the big cities of the North. Where yes, there was still intense racism and there was nativism. If there is anti-immigrant attitude of these others coming in, there's anti-migrant attitude too. This idea of others coming into our city, even if they lived in Alabama, now they're moving to Chicago. And most of them went to World War I for jobs. And you can see that graph up on top. You know, the map is pretty vague. But that graph on top, the blue, shows the increase in cities like Chicago, New York, Detroit, etc. And this is a part of Harlem, right here. Harlem is an area of Manhattan that was pretty run down, so that was area cheaper real estate. I should have. Even in the bigger cities, they would be heavily segregated in the north, but it was not 100% legally segregated. But it was still very segregated. Remember the South, there's Jim Crow laws, so very much segregated. They mentioned that in the video when he talked about, when Sterling Brown talked about they could only go to Grand Central Station to eat. And also there's only some neighborhoods that were clearly white and black. And almost all these cities. Think about this wave of people moving north. That's Harlem. And remember sundown towns. We mentioned this once before. These were smaller towns that would not allow African Americans or pretty much anybody who's not white into town. And here's one, if you're getting a stranger, we'll try to help you out because it was so difficult to move. Hey, big cities are a heck of a lot more expensive. I mean, we live in Helena. That's a pretty big city. And this is actually one, somebody was arrested in Atlanta for going from the north to the south to try to recruit African Americans to get out of Ella sharecropping to go to Chicago. Their labor is going. So they had to go to big cities. So you have this big influx of people for this is a big deal. Big influx going to Chicago, especially Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, Omaha, Newark. We can go almost every big city of the north. And it's no coincidence also that the KKK was making their emergence. Okay, we have Birth of the Nation back in 1913. We mentioned that before. Here's a still of Birth of the Nation, the quote from Woodrow Wilson, glorifying the Klan. But this was going to be for real Americans. And what were real Americans? Well, it was more based upon not so much what is an American, it's more like what are we not. They were not immigrants from any place other than Northern or Northwestern Europe. Very anti-Semitic, very anti-Catholic, and basically anybody with darker colored skin, especially African Americans, but it could also be anybody from Latin America, anybody from Asia, and of course, anybody from Africa itself. And this shows the anti-Catholic bias. The anti-Catholic bias was huge. Clement, Pope, but it's also rapidly anti-communist, They're gonna be anti-Italian, they're gonna be anti-Slav, they're gonna be anti-Russian. This is the Klan march down what is now the mall in front of the Capitol. And I know this was on your list of things to see. Here are Klansmen on a Ferris wheel at a fair. And do you remember from the video, what state did the Klan control? Yeah, Indiana. The majority of the big Klan movements were not in the South. Georgia, Louisiana, but they were in plain states. They were in Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, and Oregon had a massive Klan. And I should add, it was both parties. There were members of the Democratic Party were Klansmen, like for example, Oregon, and in Indiana, they were all Republicans. So the Klan was an equal opportunity bigotry organization, equal opportunity racist and prejudice. Yeah, that's kind of an incredible picture. Like, this would be a postcard. Yeah, a postcard. I know. This was the most racist time in history. In history. So you have all these things coming together into what's called Red Summer. And this is 1992. Now, I remember being in college, being taught by my professor. This one I didn't particularly like. But I remember him saying that this was part of the Red Scare. I said, oh yeah, it's part of the Red Scare. Red Summer, Red Scare. No. It might have been triggered, or the Red Scare got people riled up by this fear of communism and extremism, but it was red for blood. And this was an attack on mostly whites on African-American populations that have moved north in the Great Migration, and they called them race riots, but of course they're going to fight back. Here, this is in Newark, New Jersey, about a family that's being kicked out of their neighborhood because it is a white neighborhood. Here, it's not clear what happened. This is in Omaha. And these are the biggest areas. My grandma on my mom's side grew up in Omaha. And she told me about it. She remembers this. Because the railroad tracks were the dividing line for races in Omaha. Omaha was about 250,000 people. I remember this riot. See, he'd been brutally attacked. We don't know who did it. We see him there. So these were brutal attacks. And then, of course, when many were veterans, but when African Americans fought back, they're going to be the ones being arrested. Here's a couple headlines. This is in Georgia. That's a lynching in Georgia during Red Summer. It's spread throughout. This is in Washington, D.C., the National Guard sent out. Here, this is a headline in Columbus, Ohio. And just making stuff up. And by the way, who enslaved who? Yeah.
Oh, what year was Red Summer
1919 to 1920. It called Red Summer, but it bled into Red Summer. But I got to talk about one thing that happened in 1921, which is seen as like the culmination, like the last real big attack on African Americans to take away rights of those who moved. But it happened in Tulsa, and that is 1921. There was a black man accused of rape. He was drugged out of a prison. There was a lynching and then a lynching of others. And that turned into an attack led by the Klan. That's the Tulsa Klan burning a cross in celebration after. So these are segregated neighborhoods in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Oklahoma, even though it wasn't a state, had Jim Crow, wasn't a state during the Civil War, had Jim Crow laws. And the business district for the segregated area where blacks could live in Tulsa was called Little Africa. And so it was attacked. And to put this down, to stop this race riot, as they called it, the Oklahoma National Guard was sent in, and the brand new Air National Guard. And they used artillery and planes to bomb Little Africa. They didn't attack, but they bombed that area, destroyed this whole business area. That was, considering what they had to go through with Jim Crow laws, a very thriving district. They literally just found a mass grave of 138 bodies 4 years ago. They found it during COVID. And there was talk about making this kind of a park in the town, a national park run by the Park Service. That, of course, now is gone. There's no chance of that right now. They won't even acknowledge that now. That's taken out of our US history books in some ways, but. Still have it here. This was a big deal. But this is telling African Americans, you resist, this is what happens. No one talked about Tulsa. I didn't get this from any of my teachers until college. And that was just kind of mentioned. So then you can imagine you have nativists feeling. Here, we're gonna keep all the riprap out. We're not a dumping ground for European immigrants or anybody else, all this rubbish, these criminals. Here, the flood of immigrants from Europe and Asia and destroying this kind of melting pot of American civilization. It's running over and leading to unassimilated aliens. It's pretty shocking. We have all this developing. Remember back in the 1890s, that social Darwinistic idea of eugenics. In the 1920s, that came out with a fury about no race mixing, but not just race mixing, selective breeding. Here's one from 1920 from a eugenics journal showing this hierarchy of race. And how can you have race mixing when you have a clear on top is Caucasian, Chinese, Hottentot is Southwest Africans. It's a slang for what was going to be what was then a German, then a British colony, Australian, which meant the Aborigine population. But it wasn't just there. It was like, well, you want to breed inferior people with superior people. So it wasn't just color of skin, it was all rating everybody on those who are superior all the way down. Heredity a big problem. This is 1926. This is the New York Times. Home for feeble-minded is filled with those whose parents were not as carefully selected as dairymen breed cattle. So we got to make sure that we don't mix smart and dumb people together. So there's the American Eugenics Society. There was a Montana Eugenics Society, and you would get a little card. You would go and apply. And the big thing is for people of Northern Europe descent, they get you a card that's being pure white. And then you would only want to find as a mate someone who had the card that said you were pure white. And then they would rate it down. If you're from like Southeastern Europe, they give you a percentage. So you're like 80% white. So you can't intermarry with and be part of this society with somebody who is above 80%, because that would impurify the race. This is 1920s. And these cards are so wrong. And so this was eugenics. Here it's look what happens if you breed pure white. Get white. But what happens? Pure black and pure white rats and superior genes. This was the height of racism. And I think of this kind of stuff, I think of Nazi Germany. Well, it was all over the world. Eugenics would be part of Nazi ideology, would start in the US here and would be huge here. It's no coincidence that will happen. Oh, I like this one. It's kind of amazing. Are we Americans to be so careful for the pedigree of our pigs and chickens and cattle, and then leave the ancestry of our children to chance or blind sentiment? What's blind sentiment? Two people fall in love together. That's what we're talking about. Grab your card. So that would lead to the National Origins Act. Sometimes you see the National Origins Act called the Immigration Act of 1924. And in it, the whole goal was to limit immigration from all over the world. They would set a quota on immigrants, but the quotas would be so low that basically only Northwestern Europe. And Northwestern Europe would be red here, so it would dramatically be, they cut all immigrants, but most people from Northwestern Europe, but as you see here, most from South, Southern, Eastern, and Europe and Asia. And here, we'll keep out the riffraff by just letting a few good ones in. And immigration dropped dramatically in the United States. So they went by race. And the whole goal about this was no dangerous immigrants, no inferior races. So anybody with anything, wrote it down. It was a big debate for years. And if we're going to divide people by race, then they would have job percentages, like I told you, for eugenics. What is more white? It was a really big debate for about 4 years about people from the brand new Republic of Turkey. Are they white or not white? And it was a debate. Remember, this all came out of slavery in the colonies. The term race came out of slavery in the colonies. And now they're going to say, and they'll try to go on the 80%, 90% about color of skin have nothing to do with who they are. Turkey was the biggest, the second biggest would be people from India. Would be India, what percentage? And so, what a time. A very important law. And so here's one, they paid people, Eugenics Society, they paid people who were immigrants to walk around with things like, I cannot read this sign, by what right do I have children? You let them have children. And here, they divide people by mental development, we can't mix, we got idiot, low grade imbecile, high grade imbecile, somehow they can figure out medium imbecile. And at the height of this is moron. Get rid of IQ tests, it would come out of eugenics. They were eugenic based then to divide people. Yeah, this, what a time. We have a complex history, don't we? I mean, it's pretty interesting. These are all the states that are colored by 1935 had eugenics laws. Forced sterilization of women who are considered to be inferior by race or mental capacity. Montana sterilized over 1,000 women. And this is a brutal surgery. This is a brutal surgery, especially then. So, oh, by the way, how long will these laws last? Some states in the South into the 1900s. Sometimes they sterilize women without their knowing. Yes. And that would be at that time about 12-inch smaller. It's a big deal. Now they have ways, it's still a big deal, but it's safer, but yeah, it's. Yeah, like for women would come in to get a C-section and they just do it. Yeah, that happened all the time. So, ironically, and it shows you the amazing of the, for the type of people that, well, America, the Harlem Renaissance, and many of these people when they came over the Great Migration would form this unique culture and this combination of all the different cultures in the United States. And we sometimes call this urban culture, but this is, this is people from all different ancestry, but it would be stimulated by the fact that because of the Great Migration, people were isolated in the Harlem Renaissance. And this is where we get the term the Jazz Age for what came out of this. So jazz was a relatively new form of music that came out of both, came out of the South, the North, had people who were white and black who sang it. Here's the great Cap Calloway and his band. The Cotton Club would be a jazz club. And jazz was the music that really personified America, that took from all different cultural groups. And boy, would there be a backlash against jazz. This is the 1920s jazz, which I like. 1950s jazz, I don't like. I'm allowed, right? I'm not a beatnik. Moving on. The Roaring Twenties, though. So this is where we get right to this kind of the myth of the 20s. The video did a very good job on this. This kind of myth that it was nothing but fun and glamour. And part of the reason why these movies personified it, but think about the 1930s. And then going into the war. So tough. Let's go back to the way it was. Just like when Warren G. Harding went to return to normalcy, let's go back to the 1890s, which is ridiculous, but that's what they said. And a time of prosperity, and also the worship of the individual. But this kind of goes back to that worship of the individual, or the myth of the individual, that they got rich on their own. And some people got rich by their own brilliance, their own ability to build or to gamble on the stock market. But actually, it was a rough time. Wages for most American drops, and it's going to be bookended by one horrible depression and the worst depression to hit the world. I know there's still time. Oh. I have to print your essay real fast. What? I'll look at it. All right, so back to this. So not only that, we have a massive elk in a parade in Missoula. Who would love if this still existed? I would go see this. Could it be a Trojan elk? The beginning of an invasion? Look how massive this is. I'm so jealous. We got nothing cool now. Nothing. At least this cool. Except for us in here. Nothing else is cool. So this was the era of a real growth of conservatism. And the same kind of conservatism that came out of the Second Great Awakening. The fear of modernism, but also with the new immigration and the new economy, the new consumer economy, there's a real fear of people losing their status. And don't forget, Bacon's rebellion and racism comes out of status. The convincing of one group of people that they have a higher status, even though they don't have money, than somebody else. Turned out to be based upon color of skin. But people were scared about losing what they have. And so they fought back against this new economy. And this happens every single time. This is going to happen. That will explain the nativism and also intensely social Darwinistic. If I want to lose my status, that implies that I naturally have a status above somebody else. Natural hierarchy, social Darwinism. But at the same time, we have the growth of a brand new form of religion called fundamentalism. When they said they were going to go back to the fundamentals of the Christian church. It literally came from a book called The Fundamentals of the Christian Church from 1912, became a big deal in 1913, 1914, spread the country, kind of like the Second Great Awakening. Why capitalize the W? Awake! Here's the Reverend Billy Sunday, who was mentioned in that video. And the big reason why it spread, radio. This was made for radio. To go on the radio and give these fire and brimstone sermons. And if it's all voice, you really have got to be energetic. So this was a heaven or hell thing. And they called it old time religion, even though this was nothing like the way religion ever was. But people didn't know. They just kind of thought, oh, this is the way original Christians do it. Let's go back to this style of religion. So if you ever heard of the rapture, that will come out in this era, where the end is near, millennialism. The end is near. And when there will be a judgment by God, those who have believed and born again, which came out of the Second Great Awakening. The rapture is they will be brought up into heaven, and everybody else will go through a fiery Armageddon. It's a very loose interpretation of the New Testament. All this came out of here, but it was to restore that idealized. So let's go back to when life was better. Now, when was life better? They made it up. This is idealized. They took little elements they remember and said, wasn't that great? We didn't have these problems back then. But of course, they forgot the problems. They said, let's go back to the 1890s. But one thing they said over and over again, back when people knew their place. So we would have all these immigrants or radicals demanding rights, unions. Women demanding the right of vote, where women could go back to their place. What is their place? They call it domesticity. Now, they wouldn't have said that. They would have said their natural place. But remember, that was created. Or for that matter, African Americans escaping the hell of the Jim Crow South and sharecropping and expecting to have these relative equality in the North. Know your place. So, first step, we got to get rid of jazz music. Yeah, get rid of jazz. They did the same thing in the 1950s to get rid of rock and roll. It's the devil's music. And there was a racial base to it. But of course, it's similar background. It's great American art. I can remember laws against, it sounds so funny saying it today, but 1989, there was a proposal to limit and get rid of, it's called to get rid of the scourge of rap music. And I just found that really funny the way they used it. So, the Scopes monkey trial, we saw this in the video, the Scopes monkey trial. And that was in Dayton, Tennessee, and that was about teaching evolution. Now, that's a really pretty picture. Now, So, teaching evolution. And that was a real fun, you could fit that in with that conservative ideal. Remember William Jennings Bryan? He led the prosecution because he hated social Darwinism. It would lead to his death, but because he's going against his own allies, as it will turn out. But here it says the path of education. And it says science falsely so-called. I don't know why they don't say so-called science. It's a very weird way of putting it. But like the Pied Piper, leading all the children by Darwin to disbelief in God and the Bible. A path, a dark path, out of the light. As we all know, science does this. And I should add, science education would drop dramatically. That fear of science education would last for years. And school districts were actually really afraid to teach science until Sputnik. Thank you, Russians. Scared everyone straight, so to speak. Oh my God, we got to start paying attention to science. No more of this avoiding science. We have to actually get on the straight and narrow and learn again. So the politics of the 1920s was also very conservative. Very conservative. And they were culturally conservative, very cultural. That's church fundamentalism, nativism. That's cultural conservatism. But they were also isolationists. And the new conservative laissez-faire economics called trickle-down economics. And they really tried to portray the United States as the most prosperous country in the world, even more prosperous than ancient Rome, which, what are you talking about? How do you measure that? And that just makes me laugh. But the highest standard of living. And yes, the United States did. Of course, remember, the United States' biggest trade rivals destroyed themselves in World War I. So the election of 1920, just to review, we got a little bit in the video, but just to review, that's where we get Warren G. Harding would run with the Union buster Calvin Coolidge, Silent Cal, a return to normalcy, conservatism. The Democrats ran James Cox, a conservative Democrat, conservative as in laissez-faire, and a progressive Democrat whose cousin was Teddy Roosevelt, following in his footsteps, Franklin Roosevelt. In New York, progressives were becoming more and more Democratic, so he was a Democrat. And remember, Debs ran from prison. Remember, he was arrested under the Espionage Act. So here's Harding, you're the man for us, but I like this one. Here's a poster from 1920, America First. Remember conservatism in foreign policy, isolationism, unilateralism, our country, no more foreign wars, America First. So when the group that would try to stay out of World War II and be pretty pro-Nazi that Lindbergh would be part of would be America First. And this is one of the slogans today of the Trump campaign, of the Trump presidency is America First. Very conservative. So I like this one. Back to normal. No more disruptions. And don't forget the flu it just happened. Harding, Uncle Sam, Coolidge. And look at the victory. Remember, there's no Republican Party most of the South. Tennessee, there was no real Republican Party, but Harding was on the ballot. They voted for him. A sweep. Harding was elected president. And it was scandal driven. He was drunk, he had affairs. Don't worry about this. Just don't forget the Teapot Dome. That's the biggest one. His Secretary of the Interior, Albert Paul, sold away the oil reserves, thus the oil scandal. But the Democrats couldn't really peg Harding because Harding died of a heart attack before this had become big news. And Coolidge was seen to be above the fray, which was almost certainly true. Coolidge spent most of his time in Vermont while he was vice president. He wasn't part of anything. So Republicans weren't tainted by this, partially because the Democrats really didn't want to. Democrats were pretty conservative economically too. So Calvin Coolidge would become president. The business of America is business. And yes, he worked solid 1 to 2 hour days. You don't have to write this down, but I stole this meme from Saves Plus. Pretty cool, huh? What philosophy is this? What is trickle-down economics, but what philosophy? This is social Darwinism. He was intensely social Darwinist. Intensely. One thing about trickle-down economics, it is social Darwinism. Help the wealthy, help business, because they're the ones who know how to. They're the ones who know how to earn wealth. Don't let the weak pull you down. Yes. Say it again. I can and I will. So Coolidge would run again for president. He would run. He would run on his own merits in 1924. The economy was doing better. So normally, when the economy is doing better, the president benefits from it. Seems to be we kind of live in alternative universe now. Don't worry about Doherty or the VA, the brand new Veterans Administration. Don't worry about these. I just want you to know this. Good. So that 1924, Calvin Coolidge would run for president, and the Democrats would nominate even a more economically conservative candidate, John Davis. And Davis tried to get the Teapot Zone, tried to use this, didn't work. Here's attacking Republicans for this. Didn't work. Because people saw the scandal as something outside of them. A bunch of scandals today kind of think, sometimes feel like they're outside. And Robert La Follette would run as the progressive ticket in the progressive ticket. Remember the progressives? They ran Teddy Roosevelt in 1912. The Bull Moose Party did pretty well. The most famous progressive at that time was Fighting Bob La Follette of Wisconsin. There he is, dude, I'm fighting. And he was really popular, but remember, third party candidate. That's going to ensure a pretty big Coolidge victory. Because the Democrats are actually running more like Republicans, so I'll push more for Republicans, and they'll split the remaining kind of so-called the progressive vote. Full dinner pen. Prosperity vote, full dinner pen. If I would have said it's dinner time in 1924, what meal is that? Lunch. And dinner pails like your lunchbox. That's dinner pail. Dinner was very rarely did people say lunch. Supper was evening, dinner was your noontime meal. Dinner pail, your lunchbox. So the thing was, part of the issue was it was very much pro big business, or as them, this shows it. Both the Democrat and Republican were puppets of big business, which they were both very pro big business. Another sweep. Solid South went for the Democrats. No Republican Party. La Follette was from Wisconsin. Coolidge would win. And it was laissez-faire. Business, and I love the business leaders with the cash register singing, "Oh, what a friend we have." But Coolidge did not want to run again. And so in 1928, it would go to the very prominent Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover. Remember, he ran the Food Administration, sent food to famine, to people suffering from the famine in Russia because of the Civil War. The Hoover seemed to be the ideal choice. He was conservative economically, but not as laissez-faire as Coolidge. Al Smith was a Democrat, and Al Smith was Catholic. Remember the anti-Catholic bias we just talked about? He's a wet. A wet means he wants to get rid of prohibition. Dries meant you want to keep prohibition. So, 1921, drinking had dropped by about 50%. But by 1928, people were growing tired of this restriction on their life. And even though drinking was still much lower than it was before prohibition, there were more people breaking the law. But of course, this is going to offend a lot of areas, like rural areas, that were more prohibition. He was seen as very urban. And remember, this was the time of prohibition, where we have organized crime, gangsters, gunfights over territory in big cities. Just imagine if you're sitting in Helen and you could turn on this brand new invention called the wireless radio. Boy, the wireless was a big deal. 1920, no one had it. You could build one and maybe get a little bit of Morse code. There was nobody transmitting. By 1922, it's going coast to coast. People were buying radios. All of a sudden now, you could be sitting at home and hear a presidential candidate. It's on the radio, turn it on. And in fact, you could hear music. They were doing radio shows. They invented this new thing to pay for called commercials. All done in just less than a decade. This radical new thing. Now imagine you're sitting in Helena. You hear about big cities and then syndicate crime, gangsters. And also, you're probably pretty nativist. Or you're sitting in Peoria, Illinois, wherever. You can turn on the radio and you can finally hear Al Smith. Everyone says Catholic bias. Well, let's listen to this voice. This is from a little thing I recorded. So, this is the narrator and then Al Smith's voice. Maybe. Here's Smith. Hi, the audience. If I could do that voice and not destroy my throat, that'd be the only voice I would do. Yes, and I would annoy everybody. By the way, that's somebody who's smoking about 25 cigars an hour. What does he sound like? My first thought is when I heard that, I think of like a cartoon character. He sounds like a gangster. Oh my God, this gangster. And he terrified people in rural America. Yes, there was anti-Catholic bias, but oh my God, a gangster. I should have had chicken in every pot. Prosperity. I wonder if that will come back to haunt Hoover in the next couple years. But look at this sweep. Only the Democratic South. Not because they like Smith. They had a lot of anti-Catholic bias, but there's no Republican Party. He didn't even win his own state. Were you with the eighth graders?
Yep.
You came out alive?
Yep, I did. Just barely.
All right. So last thing for today, everyone write down the consumer economy. Because we got to talk a little bit about the economy, then come back to the politics. Because what are politics? Hey, economic policy. This is the new consumer economy. You can mass produce goods, but now we got to sell them. And the workers are the consumers. But what happens if the workers' wages aren't going up, which wages weren't? Where are they going to get the money? There's my hint up there. We needed now, for the first time in American history, debt, installment plans. Workers had to buy money or had to borrow money to buy goods. Did I say buy money? I get you. But this is the percentage of household debt to the GDP size of the economy. It's this red line here. And look how debt as a percentage of the economy went up the entire decade, along with the wealth of the top 10%. What happens if people can't borrow anymore and they can't buy the goods? Do you see a catastrophe coming? Tomorrow, hard economics, trickle down economics. Okay, I forgot to hand this out. Let me get this out really quick. This is the Espionage Act out of 20. People did very good on that. It's been burning a hole in my pocket. Oh. Good thing you can show up for this. Jesse, that was pretty good. Let me get this on the way out. Yeah, I hate that too. I've got that. Really? I hate it. I know. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for having patience with me. Thank you for doing that. Should I give him a grade or just make him redo it?
Probably should make him redo it.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. We'll make it. Don't be ready to be gone tomorrow, Friday. Where are you going? Phoenix. He's taking a trip to Phoenix while the rest of us work. People like you. Okay, so tomorrow I'm gonna assign. You think I'm tomorrow? Yeah. You got me before? No. Got it, no. So you gotta check TV, we got. Chapter one. Only he knows about this.
I looked over everything. Thank you.
So, you know, Wednesday, I'm not.
I start marketing. I'm gonna go next.
So you're gonna.
So first, are you I was like trying to make something good stuff today. Yeah, they don't like how we're talking. Yeah.
I think I figured it out.
Okay, yeah. And I also. So I know I can't like. That's right.
So let me think.
Okay.
Who's the first? Yes, the one with like this. And I'm. No, that one. Won't be the sound. All right, everybody. Here it is. Yeah, but answer. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Oh, I didn't look. I didn't look. I wrote the equations. Sorry. Give me a second, everybody. How about a Kit Kat? How about a Kit Kat?
That's why I'm.
I have
It's like judgment because food's from the bed.
I need some energy.
I have. I think you just give straight.
All right, everyone, let's go and take your notes out.
I don't.